What would you do if your beloved companion began acting strangely, restless, distant, and with a swollen belly you couldn't explain? For Henry, a widowed farmer, these changes in Goldie, his loyal golden retriever, brought deep concern. Was it simply old age catching up with her, or something far more serious? Little did Henry know, this journey would lead to moments of joy, heartbreak, and a lesson in cherishing every fleeting moment of life. Before we dive into this heartfelt journey, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Whether it's a cozy corner in New York or a sunny spot in California, we'd love to hear from you. May God bless you and guide you through this inspiring story. Henry Carter, 70 years old, lived a quiet, simple life on his small farm in Vermont. After the passing of his wife Emma many years ago, the farm became his sanctuary, and he found solace in the solitude of his routines. The seasons changed, the animals were fed, and each morning he would enjoy a warm cup of coffee while watching the snow fall outside. It was an ordinary life, a peaceful life. But on this particular winter morning, something felt different. The sun had barely risen when Henry sat in his favorite armchair, the one by the window, watching the world outside. The snow covered everything in a blanket of pure white, and the silence was thick, the world frozen in place. The only movement came from his loyal golden retriever Goldie, who was pacing around the room, restless and uneasy. Goldie was 13 years old, her once vibrant golden coat beginning to show signs of aging, a few grey hairs at her muzzle and around her eyes. But despite her age, she had always been Henry's constant companion. Her gentle nature and calm presence were a comfort to him, especially after Emma's passing. For years, Goldie had been by his side, offering quiet companionship, a wag of the tail, and a soft nudge when he needed it most. But today, something wasn't right. Henry watched as Goldie moved restlessly through the living room, her paws clicking lightly against the hardwood floor as she walked in circles. She would pause for a moment, then sigh deeply before continuing her pacing, her brown eyes wide and searching. It was as if she couldn't get comfortable, couldn't find a place to settle. "Goldie?" Henry called out gently, his voice low but filled with concern. The dog's eyes briefly met his before she moved again, pacing in tight circles, clearly uncomfortable. Henry stood up slowly, his joints creaking with age, and walked over to her. He crouched beside her, running his hand gently over her soft fur, hoping to calm her, but it didn't seem to help. "What is it, girl?" he murmured softly, his concern deepening as he watched her. She looked up at him again, her gaze filled with an almost pleading look, before lying down near the fireplace. But even then she continued to shift her position, unable to find rest. Henry watched her with growing unease. For a moment he tried to convince himself that it was just her age catching up with her, that maybe she was simply tired, that perhaps she was just having an off day. After all, Goldie was no longer a young dog. But as he watched her, pacing again, and letting out a soft, quiet whine, Henry couldn't ignore the feeling in the pit of his stomach. There was something more to this. Goldie had always been a calm dog. She had always been at ease with everything around her. But now she seemed agitated, her body tense, her movements jerky and restless. It was as though something inside her was wrong. Henry's heart tightened. He had known Goldie all her life, from the time she was a playful puppy, racing through the fields with the kids, to the calm, older dog she had become. But this was different. Henry walked over to the kitchen counter and began preparing breakfast, but he kept glancing back at Goldie. The dog had curled up again near the hearth, but she still didn't seem comfortable. She was lying still, yet there was an unease about her, a tension in the way she held her body. Henry knew this wasn't just old age. He had spent years learning the signs of aging in his dog, from the way her fur had started to thin out to the way her joints creaked when she moved. He had seen the slowing of her steps, the weariness that came with time, but this was something new. This wasn't the usual signs of aging. There was something off, something that unsettled him. "Maybe it's just me, getting old myself," Henry muttered quietly, trying to dismiss the unease that had settled over him. But he knew deep down it wasn't just him. Goldie wasn't acting like herself. As he stood by the stove, flipping the pancakes he had started, his eyes kept darting back to the dog. She lay there, still and quiet now, but Henry could see her chest rising and falling with labored breaths. He wiped his hands on his apron and made his way back over to Goldie. She barely acknowledged his presence this time, only lifting her eyes slightly before letting them close again. "Goldie," Henry said softly, crouching beside her. He reached out to gently stroke her head, but she didn't respond as she normally would. She didn't nudge his hand, didn't lick his fingers, nothing. She simply lay there, her breathing still shallow, her body tense. Something wasn't right. Henry had always trusted his instincts, especially when it came to Goldie. He had known her longer than he had known most people, and he could sense when something was off. This wasn't just a dog getting older. This was something else. He looked out the window, the snow continuing to fall gently outside. It was peaceful, the world outside unchanged, untouched by the tension that seemed to have gripped his house. But in here, in the silence of the room, there was only the soft sound of Goldie's labored breaths and the growing unease in Henry's chest. Without another thought, Henry stood up, grabbing his jacket from the back of the door. He didn't waste time second-guessing himself. If there was something wrong with Goldie, he couldn't wait. He had to know what was going on. "All right, girl," he murmured softly as he reached for the leash. "Let's go see Dr. Mitchell." Goldie didn't react, didn't show her usual excitement at the mention of a car ride. She simply got to her feet slowly, her movements sluggish, and followed him to the door. Henry opened it, letting the cold air rush in, and helped Goldie into the truck. She climbed in hesitantly, her eyes still distant, her body stiff as she settled on the seat. Henry gave her a soft pat on the head, his own heart heavy with worry, before getting into the driver's seat. The drive to the vet's office was short, but the time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Henry kept glancing at Goldie in the rearview mirror, his worry growing with each passing mile. He had spent years with this dog, had been through so much with her, and he couldn't bear the thought of something happening to her. When they reached the clinic, Henry helped Goldie out of the truck and walked her inside. The small clinic was warm, the scent of antiseptic filling the air. The receptionist greeted them with a friendly smile, but Henry couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He kept his hand on Goldie's back as they sat in the waiting area, watching her closely. Goldie lay quietly at his feet, her head resting on the floor, but Henry could see that she wasn't fully at ease. He looked at the clock on the wall. The minutes passed slowly, the sound of ticking in his mind matching the uneasy beat of his own heart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Mitchell, the kind veterinarian who had cared for Goldie for years, came to the waiting room. Her warm smile brought a small amount of comfort to Henry, but he couldn't shake his worry. "Good morning, Henry," Dr. Mitchell greeted him. "What seems to be the trouble with Goldie today?" Henry explained the odd behavior. Goldie's restless pacing, her labored breathing, and her inability to find comfort. Dr. Mitchell listened carefully, nodding as she took notes. Then, with a reassuring smile, she told Henry they would run some tests to figure out what was going on. What was wrong with Goldie, and what would the vet say? As Henry followed Dr. Mitchell into the examination room, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. His thoughts raced, his mind full of worry and questions. What could be wrong with Goldie? Was it simply old age catching up to her, or something more serious? He watched the veterinarian prepare for the examination, the soft click of her tools against the counter only amplifying his anxiety. "Goldie, you're always so strong," Henry murmured, his voice barely audible. "Please be all right." Dr. Mitchell, as always, was calm and reassuring. She spoke to Goldie in a soft, soothing tone, patting her gently on the head as she moved to examine her. Goldie, still lying on the table, let out a soft sigh, her brown eyes following the movements of the vet but betraying a certain unease Henry hadn't seen before. Dr. Mitchell looked up at Henry. "Let's take a look and make sure everything's okay. We'll start with the basics, and then we can run some tests if needed." Henry nodded, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He hadn't expected much, but the feeling of dread lingered. Goldie had been his loyal companion for so long, and the thought of anything seriously wrong with her felt almost unbearable. Dr. Mitchell began with the usual checks, listening to Goldie's heart, checking her gums, and gently feeling her belly. Goldie seemed to flinch at times, but for the most part she tolerated it, though her discomfort was evident. After a few minutes of examination, Dr. Mitchell paused, her expression thoughtful. Let's do an ultrasound," she said, her voice steady but hinting at something Henry couldn't quite place. Henry's heart skipped a beat. An ultrasound? Why would an ultrasound be necessary? Was there something wrong with Goldie's internal organs? He bit his lip, trying to stay calm, but the feeling of dread deepened. Dr. Mitchell prepared the ultrasound machine, and as the cold gel was applied to Goldie's belly, Henry couldn't help but watch, his mind racing with questions. He kept telling himself that it was probably nothing, just a precaution. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the usual checkup. As the technician turned the machine on, a black and white image flickered on the screen. Henry leaned in, squinting to try to make sense of the shapes. Dr. Mitchell moved the sensor gently over Goldie's abdomen, and the image became clearer. There were several dark spots on the screen. Dr. Mitchell's fingers hovered over the screen as she smiled at Henry. "See these right here?" she pointed, her voice soft. "Those are puppies." For a moment, Henry froze. His mind couldn't process what he was hearing. Puppies. Goldie, his elderly golden retriever, pregnant. It didn't seem possible. She was too old, 13 years old, and he had never noticed anything in her behavior that suggested she was in heat recently. "Puppies?" Henry finally managed to ask, his voice rough with disbelief. "But she's 13 years old." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "Yes, I know. It's unusual, but it's not impossible. It looks like Goldie is pregnant. I can count at least 5 puppies in there." Henry sat back in his chair, stunned. His mind raced as the information slowly sank in. Goldie, his loyal, aging dog, was about to become a mother, at 13 years old. This was a shock he never could have expected. "She's too old," Henry repeated, almost to himself. "How is this possible?" Dr. Mitchell's smile remained gentle. "It's rare, but it can happen. Sometimes older dogs can still have puppies if they've recently gone through a heat cycle. It could be that Goldie was in heat recently and we just didn't notice." Henry shook his head in disbelief, still struggling to comprehend the situation. "I didn't even think she was still capable of having puppies. She's been slowing down for months, and now this." Dr. Mitchell's tone softened, her eyes kind with understanding. "It's definitely not something we see often, especially in older dogs. But she seems to be doing well. The important thing now is to make sure she's healthy and comfortable. We'll need to take extra care of her during this pregnancy." Henry's thoughts were scattered. He had never imagined this, never even considered the possibility. Goldie had been by his side through everything, the laughter, the silence, the years of grief after Emma's passing. And now, just when he thought her life was winding down, she was about to bring new life into the world. "I don't know what to do," Henry said, his voice heavy with the weight of the news. "I never expected this. I thought we were just slowing down together." Dr. Mitchell gave him a reassuring smile. "You'll do just fine, Henry. We'll help you through this. She'll need a comfortable place to rest, a good diet, and regular checkups. And I suggest we schedule another ultrasound in a few weeks to monitor her progress." Henry nodded slowly, his hands trembling as he took the pamphlet Dr. Mitchell handed him. Thank you, Karen. I don't know what I would do without your help. She smiled again, standing up. Of course. That's what we're here for. We'll get through this together. As Henry helped Goldie down from the table, he gave her a gentle pat on the head, though his mind was still reeling. He had come to the clinic with concerns about his old dog's health, but he never expected the answer to be this. He had always been prepared for the day when Goldie would slow down or need to say goodbye. But this was a new challenge altogether. As they left the clinic, Henry helped Goldie into the truck, still in shock. His mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, and a mix of emotions swirled inside him. There was joy, confusion, concern. He was overwhelmed by it all. Well, Goldie, Henry said softly, giving her a pat on the head as they drove back to the farm. Looks like we've got some big changes ahead of us. Goldie looked up at him with her soft brown eyes, her tail wagging slightly, as if she understood. For the first time in a long while, Henry felt a glimmer of hope. This unexpected news had thrown him off balance, but it also gave him something new to focus on, something new to care for. And with Goldie by his side, he knew he would face whatever came next with love and determination. The days following the unexpected news of Goldie's pregnancy were a blur of preparations for Henry. At 70, the thought of managing a pregnant dog and potentially a litter of puppies was overwhelming. The farm had always been quiet and orderly, and Henry had grown accustomed to the peace of his routines. But now, everything felt different. A new chapter was unfolding in his life, and it was one he never anticipated. After speaking with Dr. Mitchell, Henry learned that Goldie would need a safe, quiet space to give birth, away from the hustle and bustle of the farm. The barn was the ideal spot, far enough from the house, but still close enough for Henry to keep an eye on her. He decided to convert a corner of the barn into a small maternity area. He would set up a makeshift whelping box, fill it with soft bedding, and ensure that it was warm and comfortable for Goldie when the time came. Henry worked tirelessly over the next few days, clearing the corner of the barn and making it safe for Goldie. He wasn't as strong as he used to be, and his back ached with every movement, but he pushed through. He knew that the most important thing now was Goldie and her puppies. The barn smelled of hay and wood, but Henry could already imagine the quiet, peaceful moments he would spend with Goldie and the puppies in the coming weeks. As he worked, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. Turning, Henry saw his grandson Ethan standing in the doorway of the barn. Ethan was 14 years old, and recently he had come to live with Henry after his mother tragically passed away in a car accident. Ethan had been through so much in a short time, and since the loss of his mother, he had become distant, withdrawn. He rarely smiled, rarely spoke, and spent most of his time locked away in his room or outside, away from the family. Henry knew that Ethan was struggling. The loss of his mother had shaken him to his core, and the boy often seemed angry and confused. But Henry also knew that the boy needed something to focus on, something to help him heal, just as Goldie needed care during her pregnancy. He had hoped that working together would help bring them closer, give them both a chance to rebuild what had been lost. "Ethan," Henry called, his voice soft but steady. "I'm setting up a spot for Goldie to have her puppies. Could you give me a hand?" Ethan stood at the doorway for a moment, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. He didn't move, didn't respond at first, and Henry could see the reluctance in his eyes. Ethan was still grieving the loss of his mother, and anything that required him to engage with the world felt like too much. Henry understood that, but he also knew that sometimes the best way to heal was to have something to care for. "You want me to help with that?" Ethan asked, his voice flat, distant. Henry nodded. "Yeah, I could use an extra set of hands. I'm not as young as I used to be." Ethan hesitated, his gaze flicking over to Goldie, who was resting quietly in a corner of the barn, her head resting on the soft bedding Henry had arranged for her. The dog lifted her head briefly and looked at Ethan with soft, welcoming eyes. Ethan didn't return the gaze. He didn't seem to care much for the dog, or for anything really, at this point. "I don't know," Ethan muttered, turning to walk back out of the barn, but Henry wasn't ready to give up. "Ethan!" he called after him, his voice a little firmer. "Come on, son. Goldie's going to need help. And maybe you can use something to focus on too. I'm not asking you to do this for me, I'm asking you to do it for her." Ethan paused at the doorway, his back turned to Henry. There was a long silence between them, and Henry could hear the distant sound of wind rustling the trees outside. It seemed like Ethan wasn't going to respond, that he would just walk away as he always did. But then, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan turned slowly and walked back into the barn. "Fine," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "What do you need me to do?" Henry smiled, a glimmer of relief washing over him. "Good," he said, his voice gentler now. "Let's get some more straw, and I'll show you how to set up the whelping box. We want Goldie to have a quiet, warm spot to give birth." Together, they worked. At first, Ethan remained silent, his hands awkwardly moving through the motions. He helped Henry gather straw and old blankets, placing them carefully in the corner of the barn. As the minutes passed, however, Henry noticed a shift. Ethan was no longer just going through the motions. He was starting to take an interest in what they were doing. He asked questions about Goldie's care, about the puppies, and Henry found himself explaining everything he knew about taking care of a pregnant dog. Soon, the whelping box was set up, and the barn was beginning to feel more like a place of refuge for both Goldie and for Ethan. They had set up a small heater nearby to keep the area warm, and the barn had started to feel more like a home for Goldie. Ethan even started arranging some extra bedding, making sure it was comfortable. "That looks good, Ethan," Henry said, his voice filled with pride. "You're doing a great job." Ethan's face softened just a little, though he didn't smile. For the first time in a long while, he seemed present, engaged in the moment. There was something about helping Goldie, something about the task at hand that seemed to bring him out of his shell. It was as if, for the first time since his mother's death, he had a purpose. "I think she'll be okay here," Ethan said quietly, glancing over at Goldie, who had been watching them both from her spot. Henry looked at his grandson and nodded. "She will. And so will you, Ethan." Ethan didn't reply, but there was a small shift in his expression. It wasn't much, just the faintest of nods, but it was enough to make Henry feel that maybe, just maybe, they were starting to rebuild the bond they once shared. The loss of Ethan's mother had cast a heavy shadow over their lives, but this shared responsibility, this task of caring for Goldie and the puppies, might be the very thing they both needed. As the evening settled in and the barn was ready for Goldie, Henry and Ethan stood side by side, looking at their work. The room was warm and inviting, the soft glow from the heater casting a comforting light on the makeshift nursery. Goldie, now lying in the whelping box, seemed at ease, her body relaxing as she nestled into the bedding. "You did good, Ethan," Henry said, clapping his grandson on the shoulder. Ethan looked at him, his face still expressionless, but his eyes softening. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "It wasn't so bad." Henry smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. This small moment of connection with Ethan felt like a step forward, and as they both stood there, silently watching over Goldie, Henry couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better for them both. It was a cold, quiet night in Vermont, the kind of night where the wind howled outside the house, rattling the windows and sending flurries of snow swirling in the dark. Inside, the barn was warm and softly lit, the hum of the heater filling the air. Goldie, now settled in her whelping box, lay there with a quiet intensity, her body tense as the first signs of labor began to show. Henry had spent the entire day preparing for this moment. He and Ethan had checked on Goldie multiple times, ensuring that she was comfortable and had everything she needed for the impending birth. The evening had settled into a tense silence. Goldie was restless, but still there was a calmness about her, a sense of readiness that filled the barn. It was just past midnight when Henry's old clock began to tick the minutes away, each one bringing them closer to the moment when Goldie would give birth to the puppies that had been growing inside her for weeks. Ethan, sitting quietly on a bale of hay beside Henry, shifted nervously, glancing over at Goldie every few seconds. The boy had stayed up late, determined to be there for this important moment, but now, as Goldie's breathing became heavier, Ethan's nerves were beginning to show. "She's ready, Grandpa," Ethan said softly, his voice betraying a hint of excitement mixed with uncertainty. Henry nodded, though his own nerves were tight in his chest. He hadn't been through many births in his lifetime, and the thought of managing the birth of a litter of puppies with an aging dog was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that he had to be there for Goldie and for Ethan. They were in this together. Goldie let out a soft whine, her body shifting, her sides heaving as a contraction came and went. Henry moved closer, gently stroking her head. "It's okay, Goldie," he murmured. "You're doing great." Ethan watched from his spot, his eyes wide, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wanted to help, but wasn't sure how. Henry had instructed him to stay close, to be ready if needed, but Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready to face what was happening. A few moments passed, and then Goldie let out a louder whimper. Henry's heart skipped a beat as he realized that the first puppy was on its way. "Here it comes, Ethan," Henry said, his voice a little more urgent now. "Get the towels ready." Ethan quickly jumped to his feet, his movements stiff, but he was determined. He grabbed the clean towels Henry had prepared and stood beside his grandfather, watching as Goldie let out another series of soft cries. The first puppy began to emerge. Henry was there, carefully guiding the puppy out as Goldie's contractions intensified. With a final push, the tiny puppy slid into the world, covered in the warmth of the sack. Henry quickly wiped it clean, gently massaging it to stimulate breathing. The little one let out a high-pitched squeak, the first sound of new life in the barn. Ethan's eyes lit up with wonder. "It's so tiny," he whispered, watching as Henry carefully placed the first puppy beside Goldie. "Yeah," Henry said with a soft smile, "but it's perfect." The next few hours passed in a blur. Goldie, though older, was handling the birth with a quiet strength that amazed Henry. One by one the puppies were born, each one smaller than the next, but all of them healthy and eager to nurse. There were 8 in total, each with soft golden fur, their tiny bodies wriggling and squirming as they sought their mother's warmth and comfort. But then, just when it seemed that Goldie's work was almost done, the final puppy arrived. This one was smaller than the rest, its body limp and still. Goldie sniffed it gently, nudging it with her nose, but it didn't move. Henry's heart sank as he realized what had happened. The tiny puppy hadn't survived. "Grandpa," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. He had been so focused on the excitement of the birth, but now, looking at the stillborn puppy, his expression changed. The joy of the moment seemed to drain away, leaving behind only the weight of the loss. Henry's face tightened with sadness, but he put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "It's a part of life, son. Sometimes not all of them make it, but that doesn't make them any less important." Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked at the tiny body in his grandfather's hands, his eyes filling with tears. "But it's not fair," he said, his voice breaking. "Why did it have to happen like this? Why did we have to lose one?" Henry gently placed the stillborn puppy in a small box, lined with a soft cloth. "I know it's hard," he said, his voice soft but steady. "It hurts. Losing anything, especially something that's so innocent and full of promise, is never easy. But it's a part of the natural cycle of life. Sometimes things don't go the way we want, and we have to learn to accept it. It doesn't make the loss any easier, but it's something we all face. Ethan wiped his eyes, though the tears kept coming. He had always been quiet, withdrawn, ever since his mother passed. The loss of that little puppy seemed to hit him harder than he had expected. "But we have to focus on what we do have," Henry continued, his voice firm with understanding. "We've got 8 healthy puppies here, all strong and ready to grow. They're a gift, Ethan, a gift." Ethan nodded, though the sorrow in his eyes was hard to ignore. He knelt beside his grandfather, looking at the puppies that were now safely nestled next to Goldie, who was lovingly tending to each one. Ethan reached out, gently touching the fur of the closest puppy, his hand trembling slightly. "Yeah," Ethan whispered, his voice steadier now. "We've got 8. Henry smiled softly, reaching out to ruffle Ethan's hair. "That's right, and we'll take care of them, just like we've always taken care of each other." As the hours passed, the excitement of the night slowly faded, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Goldie lay contentedly in her whelping box, her puppies nestled close to her side, each one safe and warm. Ethan sat by Henry, his face still solemn, but no longer filled with the same overwhelming sadness. They had witnessed the miracle of birth, the joy of new life, and the sadness of loss, all in one night. For the first time in a long time, Henry felt a sense of connection with his grandson. It had been a hard year for both of them, but tonight, through the birth of Goldie's puppies, they had shared something important. It was a reminder of life's fragile beauty and the importance of being there for each other, no matter the circumstances. As the night turned into morning, Henry and Ethan sat together in the warmth of the barn, watching over Goldie and her puppies. The wind howled outside, but inside there was nothing but quiet joy, tempered by the reality of life's inevitable losses. The morning after the birth, the air in Vermont was crisp, and a blanket of fresh snow covered the farm, shimmering under the weak winter sun. The barn was quiet, save for the soft sounds of Goldie and her puppies, who were nestled comfortably in their warm bed. The joy of new life had filled the barn, but the memory of the loss, the stillborn puppy, lingered in the quiet spaces of Henry and Ethan's hearts. Henry woke early, his thoughts already on the task ahead. He had never been one for ceremonies or grand gestures, but the loss of the tiny puppy had struck him deeply. It wasn't just the puppy's life that had been lost. It was the innocence of a new beginning, the hope that had been dashed before it had even had a chance to grow. He couldn't let the moment go by without doing something to honor that life, no matter how brief. As the morning sun peeked over the horizon, Henry stood by the window in the kitchen, his gaze drifting over the farm. The barn, where Goldie and the puppies rested, was bathed in a gentle light. Ethan was still asleep, but Henry knew it was time. He had to share this moment with his grandson, the boy who had struggled to find his way after the loss of his own mother, and who now, through the miracle and tragedy of Goldie's birth, was experiencing another profound loss. Henry moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing a small bundle, a soft cloth to wrap the tiny puppy, a small wooden box, and a few flowers from the garden he had carefully tended over the years. As he worked, he thought of the many losses he had experienced in his life, the death of his wife, the passing of his old dog, Charlie, and now the tiny puppy that had never had a chance to live. But with each loss came a lesson, a reminder of the preciousness of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. When Ethan finally awoke, Henry found him sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He looked tired, his face drawn. But there was something different about him this morning, something more at peace, as though the events of the previous night had touched him more deeply than Henry had expected. "Morning, Grandpa," Ethan mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Henry smiled softly, the weight of the night still present, but with a gentler understanding now. "Morning, Ethan. I need your help with something. Would you come with me for a moment? Ethan looked at his grandfather, his brow furrowing with uncertainty. What's going on? Henry gently placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. We need to give the little puppy a proper farewell. Ethan nodded slowly, his face somber as he stood up. He didn't ask any more questions, knowing that his grandfather's request was serious. They had both witnessed the loss, and now it was time to honor it. The two of them walked outside, their boots crunching in the snow as they made their way to the old oak tree in the yard. It had been a place of reflection for Henry throughout his life, a spot where he had often sat with Emma, where he had prayed for guidance in difficult times, and where he had shared many quiet moments with his dogs. Under the tree, Henry carefully set up a small spot. A patch of soft snow cleared away to make room for the wooden box and the little puppy wrapped in cloth. He turned to Ethan, who stood a few paces away, watching quietly. I know it's hard, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. But it's important to honor every life, no matter how brief. This puppy had a purpose, even if we couldn't understand it. Ethan stared at the tiny bundle in his grandfather's hands. His expression was a mix of sadness and confusion, but there was also something else there, something deeper. The loss of his mother had left a scar on Ethan's soul, but seeing this puppy, so fragile and small, and understanding the deep connection they shared as a family, was starting to open something in him. A realization that grief wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be embraced, learned from, and eventually healed. I know, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. It's just hard. Why does it always feel like something's missing? Henry smiled softly and knelt down beside his grandson, pulling him into a gentle hug. That's a part of life, Ethan. Things will always be missing, but what matters is that we have the strength to carry on. This puppy, though it didn't live, still showed us something important. It showed us the fragility of life and how much we should cherish the moments we have. Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He had always struggled with loss. After his mother's death, he had felt abandoned, adrift, like there was no anchor left in his life. But here, in this moment, with his grandfather and with Goldie's puppies, Ethan was beginning to understand that loss wasn't something that defined them. It was a part of the journey, a lesson in how precious love and connection really were. Henry gently placed the small wooden box into the soft snow beneath the oak tree and knelt down, holding Ethan's hand. I want you to say goodbye, Ethan. It's important. Ethan looked down at the little puppy, his face softening. He reached down, placing a hand gently on the box. Goodbye, he whispered. I didn't know you, but I hope you're at peace now. Henry watched his grandson, feeling a quiet pride in him. For the first time in a long time, Ethan seemed to have found a small piece of peace within himself, something he had been searching for since his mother passed. Together they sat under the oak tree in silence for a few minutes. The world seemed to hold its breath, and for once, Ethan didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The loss of the puppy, though painful, had opened his heart just a little more. He felt a connection to the puppy, to his grandfather, and to the life they shared. As they stood up and walked back toward the barn, Ethan turned to Henry, his eyes a little brighter. Thanks, Grandpa, he said quietly, for helping me understand. Henry smiled and put his arm around Ethan's shoulders. You're welcome, son. We're in this together, always. And as they returned to the barn, where Goldie and her puppies lay nestled together in the warmth, Ethan knew that life would continue. There would be losses, and there would be pain, but there would also be love, love that carried them through the toughest times, just as it always had. It was another chilly morning on the farm. The first light of dawn crept through the windows of Henry's farmhouse, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. The wind howled outside, but inside there was warmth and peace. Goldie and her puppies were doing well, and Ethan had been helping out more with the care of the new litter. There was a sense of calm in the house, a feeling that things were slowly starting to heal for both Henry and his grandson. But that peace was shattered when the phone rang early that morning. Henry picked up the receiver, not expecting any big news. He hadn't seen his son Andrew in a few months. Their relationship had been strained for years, but they always managed to keep in touch. "Hello?" Henry answered, his voice steady but laced with a hint of exhaustion. "Dad," Andrew's voice came through, sounding firm and matter-of-fact. "We need to talk about Ethan." Henry straightened up at the mention of his grandson's name. "What about Ethan?" His voice was laced with concern. He had no idea what this conversation was going to be about, but instinctively he knew it wasn't going to be easy. "I'm moving him to Boston," Andrew said without hesitation. "I've found a great job, and there are better schools there for him. It's time for him to leave the farm and get back to a normal life." Henry's heart sank. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Ethan had just begun to find a sense of stability at the farm, surrounded by Goldie, the puppies, and the routines Henry had slowly helped him rebuild after his mother's death. "Andrew," Henry said, his voice tight, "I don't think that's a good idea. Ethan has been through a lot. He's just started to heal here. He's found something to hold on to again. Moving him to Boston now, after everything, it's not right." Andrew's voice remained firm, though there was a trace of impatience in it. "Dad, I appreciate what you've done for Ethan. I really do. But it's time for him to start looking forward, not back. Boston is where his future is. There are opportunities for him there. He needs to go back to school, be around people his age, get away from all this isolation." Henry's grip on the phone tightened. The anger and frustration that had been simmering in him for years began to rise. He could feel the weight of the old disagreements with Andrew, decisions made long ago that had driven them apart. And now it seemed like his son was making another decision for Ethan that didn't take into account what was truly best for the boy. "You think he'll do better in Boston?" Henry asked, his voice cold. "After everything he's been through, he's been withdrawn and angry for so long, and now, after all this time, after Goldie, after these puppies, he's starting to open up again. He's starting to heal. You're going to take him away from that?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Henry could feel the tension mounting between them, and it weighed heavily on him. He didn't want to argue with Andrew. He didn't want to be the father who stood in the way of his son's decisions. But when it came to Ethan, it felt like he had no choice. "I'm not taking him away from healing, Dad," Andrew finally said, his voice strained. "I'm giving him a chance to move on, to have a better future. This farm, it's not the life he needs. It's not the life anyone needs. We've all had our share of difficulties here. I want better for my son." Henry felt a surge of emotion as Andrew's words sank in. "Better?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Is that what you call it? You think that sending him away from everything he's starting to love is better? You don't get it, Andrew. You don't understand what Ethan needs." Andrew's tone hardened. "I understand perfectly. I've been watching him struggle for years. I've tried to give him what I could, but it's not enough. We need to move on. He needs to be with his father. I want him to be a part of my life again, to have the opportunities I can give him in Boston." Henry was seething now, his voice rising in anger. "Opportunities? You think you can fix everything with a change of scenery? You think just because you have a better job and a better school lined up, that Ethan's going to forget everything he's been through? Do you really think he's ready for that kind of change? He's been through hell, Andrew, and it's not going to fix itself with a move to Boston." "I'm not going to argue with you, Dad," Andrew snapped. "I've made up my mind. Ethan is coming with me to Boston next week. This is happening, whether you like it or not." Henry was silent for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He could hear the finality in his son's voice, but he wasn't ready to let go, not yet. "I won't let you take him," Henry said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "He's not ready, Andrew. You can't just come in here and make decisions for him like you've always done. Ethan needs time. Time to heal. Time to find his place in this world. And he's found it here, with me, on this farm, with Goldie and the puppies." "You're being unreasonable," Andrew replied, his voice rising. "You've had your time with Ethan. It's my turn now. I'm doing what's best for him." Henry closed his eyes, his hand trembling around the phone. "I've been doing what's best for him all along," he said quietly. "And if you take him now, you'll be taking away everything that's helping him heal. I won't let you do that." There was another long silence. The weight of the conversation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Neither father nor son seemed willing to give in, and yet Henry could feel his grip on Ethan slipping, his world shaking beneath him. "I'll see you soon," Andrew said finally, his voice clipped. "But this is not up for discussion anymore." The line went dead. Henry stood there, staring at the receiver in his hand, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this conversation wasn't over. There would be more fights, more struggles. But for now, all he could do was think about Ethan, his grandson, his family, and how he would keep him safe. As the cold wind howled outside, Henry took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let go of Ethan without a fight. The days following Henry's intense conversation with Andrew had been tense, filled with an unease that seemed to settle in the very air of the farm. Ethan remained quiet, sensing the underlying conflict between his father and grandfather, but he said little about it. He continued to care for Goldie and the puppies, though his usually withdrawn demeanor seemed heavier now, burdened by the knowledge that his life was about to change once again. Henry knew he needed to find a way to resolve the situation before it spiraled out of control. He had made his stand clear to Andrew, but he also knew that pushing too hard would only push his son further away. That's when he thought of the family counseling sessions he had heard about from a neighbor. If they could sit down with a neutral party, a professional, someone who could help them understand each other, maybe they could finally find a way to communicate. He reached out to Dr. Sarah Langley, a well-regarded family therapist in the area. After explaining the situation, she agreed to meet with them for a mediation session. It was a long shot, but Henry hoped it would give Andrew the chance to see things from his perspective and, more importantly, from Ethan's. The session was scheduled for the following afternoon. Henry and Andrew arrived at Dr. Langley's office in town, a quiet, calm space filled with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Ethan, not wanting to leave his grandfather alone, had reluctantly agreed to join as well. The room was set up in a circle with Dr. Langley seated in the middle, ready to facilitate the discussion. Henry could feel the tension in the room as they all took their seats. Andrew sat across from him, arms crossed, his jaw set in determination. Ethan sat next to Henry, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his gaze directed downward. The weight of everything that had happened between them all hung in the air, thick and heavy. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Langley began, her voice warm and reassuring. "I know this is a difficult conversation to have, but it's important that we all have the opportunity to express how we're feeling. I want to remind everyone that this space is safe. We're here to listen to each other, not to argue or judge." There was a brief silence, and Henry could feel the heaviness in the room. It was clear that none of them were quite sure where to begin. Dr. Langley smiled gently. "Henry, would you like to start? You've asked for this session, so we'll begin with you." Henry took a deep breath, his hands resting on his lap. "Well," he said slowly, looking across the room at his son, "I've been thinking a lot about this situation. I know Andrew is trying to do what's best for Ethan, but I'm telling you, Ethan has found something here. He's found some peace, something he hasn't had since his mother passed away. He's been through a lot, and I think being here on the farm with Goldie and the puppies, it's helped him heal. It's given him something to focus on." He looked at Ethan, who was sitting quietly, his head down. I think Ethan feels safe here. He feels like he has a purpose again. I don't want to take that away from him. Dr. Langley turned to Andrew, giving him the floor. And Andrew, I'd like to hear your perspective on this as well. What are your thoughts? Andrew's eyes flickered to Ethan, but he didn't meet his father's gaze. I understand where Dad is coming from. I do. But I'm trying to think of what's best for Ethan in the long term. He can't stay here forever. This farm, this life, it's not enough for him. He needs better opportunities, better education, better everything. I've found a job in Boston, and the schools there are some of the best in the country. I want Ethan to have the future he deserves. I want him to be part of a bigger world, to move on from what happened here. Dr. Langley nodded thoughtfully. It sounds like you both want what's best for Ethan. But perhaps the question is, what does Ethan need right now? What will help him heal and grow while also preparing for the future? Ethan, who had been silent until now, shifted in his seat. I don't know, he said quietly, his voice soft but firm. I think I'm okay here. I don't want to leave. I like it here with Grandpa, and I like taking care of the puppies. It makes me feel important, like I'm doing something good. Henry felt a wave of relief wash over him, hearing Ethan speak up. The boy hadn't opened up like this in months, and to hear him express his feelings so honestly was a breakthrough. Andrew's expression softened just a little, though he still looked conflicted. I know, Ethan. I know you're happy here, but I want you to have more. You deserve the best opportunities. I want you to be able to go to a great school, have a career, do something important. Ethan's voice trembled a little. But what if I'm happy here? What if this is enough for me right now? Dr. Langley interjected, her voice calm but pointed. It seems like there's a lot of love in this room for Ethan. It sounds like Henry has given Ethan the space to heal, and Ethan, you feel like you're finding your footing here. At the same time, Andrew, you want to provide opportunities for Ethan. But it's clear that the decision isn't just about a better education or a new environment. It's also about understanding what Ethan needs at this moment in his life. Henry looked at Andrew, his voice softer now. I know Boston may offer opportunities, but I think Ethan needs more time. He's been through too much already. We don't have to rush this. Andrew looked at Ethan, his gaze softening as he studied his son. It was clear that his heart ached for his boy, but he was also torn between what he thought was best and what his son needed. Finally, after a long pause, Andrew spoke quietly. Maybe I haven't really listened to you, Ethan. Maybe I've been so focused on what I think is best for you that I've missed what you actually need. Ethan looked up, his expression surprised but hopeful. You're not mad at me? Andrew shook his head slowly. No, son, I'm not mad. I just want you to be happy, and maybe we need to find a way for you to have both, the opportunities and the peace you've found here. Henry watched the exchange between father and son, a glimmer of hope growing in his chest. For the first time in a long while, it seemed like they were all starting to understand each other. Dr. Langley smiled. It seems like we've made some good progress today. There's still work to be done, but this is a good start. As the session came to a close, the atmosphere in the room felt lighter, the tension eased. There was no immediate solution, but there was understanding, and sometimes that was enough. Henry stood up, feeling a sense of relief he hadn't expected. Thank you, Henry said, his voice sincere as he shook Dr. Langley's hand. Thank you for helping us talk through this. As they left the office, Ethan walked beside Henry, a small but genuine smile on his face. Andrew followed behind them, a thoughtful expression on his face, and though the future was still uncertain, for the first time in a long while, Henry felt like they were moving in the right direction. The weeks following the mediation session had marked a turning point for Ethan. He had been quiet and withdrawn for so long, but now, with the support of his grandfather Goldie and the puppies, Ethan was beginning to find his way. The healing process was slow, but with each passing day, he became more confident, more engaged, and more at peace with who he was and where he was in life. Goldie's puppies, now a few weeks old, had become Ethan's new focus. Their playful yips and tiny paws brought a sense of joy to the barn every day. Ethan had taken it upon himself to care for them, developing a careful routine to ensure they were fed, kept warm, and properly stimulated. He spent hours in the barn, feeding, cleaning, and playing with the puppies, making sure they had the attention they needed to grow strong and healthy. As he worked, Ethan began to show signs of maturity that had been absent before. He organized a feeding schedule, keeping track of when each puppy last ate and making sure they all got their share. He set up a rotation for playtime, ensuring that the puppy's early developmental needs were met. Henry had never had to remind him to tend to the puppies. Ethan was handling it all on his own, and Henry couldn't have been prouder. One evening, as Ethan sat in the barn surrounded by the puppies, Henry came in with a steaming mug of tea. He watched silently as his grandson gently coaxed one of the puppies to sit on command. The little dog was still a bit wobbly, but Ethan's patience and calm demeanor helped it learn. "You're doing great, Ethan," Henry said quietly, a sense of pride in his voice. "I never thought I'd see the day when you were training puppies." Ethan glanced up, his face softening at his grandfather's words. "It feels good, Grandpa. It feels like I'm doing something important. Like I'm helping them grow up strong, you know?" Henry smiled, settling down beside him on the hay. "I can see that. You've really taken charge of this. I've noticed how much more confident you are. It's like you've found your place." Ethan looked down at the puppies, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I guess I have. I don't feel so lost anymore. I know what I'm supposed to do now." Henry nodded, his heart swelling with pride. Ethan had come so far, from the quiet, withdrawn boy who had arrived at the farm to the young man who now took on responsibility with a sense of purpose. It was clear that the bond between him and the farm, between him and Goldie and the puppies, had transformed him. But more than that, Ethan was beginning to understand the importance of connection, the importance of caring for something beyond himself. As the weeks passed, Ethan continued to thrive in his role as caretaker for the puppies. He gave each of them names, based on their personalities. There was Rusty, the playful one, always running around and getting into mischief. Maggie, the calm one, who preferred to rest beside Goldie. Bella, the curious one, always sniffing around and exploring the barn. And the others, each with their own unique traits. All of them loved, all of them cared for by Ethan. Ethan began to take pride in these names, in the care he gave them. He even started a small notebook where he wrote down observations about their growth, their health, and their behaviors. Henry was amazed at how organized and focused Ethan had become. It was clear that the boy had found his rhythm, not just in caring for the puppies, but in life itself. One afternoon, as Ethan was playing fetch with Rusty in the yard, Goldie by his side, Andrew arrived at the farm unexpectedly. Henry was inside, preparing lunch, when he heard the familiar sound of a truck pulling into the driveway. He stepped outside to greet his son, not sure what to expect, but sensing that something had changed. "Dad," Andrew called as he stepped out of the truck, "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other day." Henry raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Andrew hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been watching Ethan, seeing how much he's changed, how happy he is here, and I realized something. I think I was wrong. I was so focused on what I thought was best for him, but he's found his place. He's found a way to heal here, and I don't want to take that away from him. I was wrong to try and force him to go to Boston." Henry felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't just about Ethan staying on the farm. It was about Andrew realizing that his son needed time, space, and love to heal, not just a new school or a new city. "I'm glad to hear you say that, Andrew," Henry said, his voice soft. "He's been through a lot, and this farm, this place, It's helped him find himself again. But it's not just about the puppies. It's about the time, the attention, the love he's getting here, from both of us. Andrew nodded, his expression more relaxed than Henry had seen it in years. Yeah, I get it now. I can see it in him. He's happy. And I'm starting to think that maybe, for now, this is exactly what he needs. Ethan, who had been playing with Rusty, looked up as he saw Andrew and Henry talking. He paused, his heart racing a little, unsure of what this conversation meant for his future. Would he have to leave? Would his life at the farm be disrupted once again? He slowly approached them, his eyes cautiously flicking between Andrew and Henry. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. Andrew turned to face his son, his expression soft. "Ethan, I've been thinking about everything and I've changed my mind. I think it's best if you stay here. If you're happy here, then I want you to stay with Grandpa. I don't want to take you away from this." Ethan's heart leapt in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Really?" Andrew smiled, his eyes filled with emotion. "Really? You've grown so much here, and I can see how much you love this place. You're more than just a boy on the farm. You're part of it, part of something important, and I think you should stay." Ethan stood there, stunned, not sure whether to laugh or cry. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he truly belonged. He turned to Henry, who was watching him with a proud smile. "Thanks, Grandpa," Ethan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad I'm here with you." Henry put his arm around Ethan's shoulders, giving him a gentle squeeze. "I'm glad you're here too, son. This is where you belong, and we'll always be here for you." The morning sunlight spilled into the barn, casting long shadows across the wooden floor as Henry and Ethan stood together, watching the puppies play. The once tiny creatures had grown stronger and more playful, their personalities beginning to emerge. Some were energetic, bounding around with enthusiasm, while others were more calm and affectionate, curling up next to Goldie for a nap. But there was one puppy who stood out among the rest. It was Buddy, a small golden pup with an unusually sweet disposition. He had always been a bit quieter than the others, but there was something special about him. From the moment he was born, Henry and Ethan had sensed a bond with him, an unspoken connection that seemed to grow stronger each day. Buddy had been the smallest of the litter at first, but he had fought through the early days with determination. He was always the first to greet Ethan in the mornings, his little tail wagging furiously, and the first to curl up on Henry's feet at night. It wasn't just the bond that made him special. It was the way he seemed to understand the pain that both Henry and Ethan had gone through. There was a calmness in him that had a healing effect, a quiet presence that brought peace to everyone around him. As the weeks went by, Henry noticed that Ethan had become particularly attached to Buddy. They spent hours together in the barn, playing, training, and simply being with each other. Buddy had become more than just a pet. He had become a friend and a source of comfort for Ethan, helping him through the toughest days, just as Goldie had helped him heal. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of caring for the puppies, Henry and Ethan sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. Buddy lay at their feet, his head resting on Ethan's lap, content and relaxed. "You know, Grandpa," Ethan said quietly, looking down at Buddy, "I think we should keep him." Henry turned to look at his grandson, surprised by the suggestion. "Buddy?" Ethan nodded, his fingers gently scratching behind the puppy's ears. "Yeah, he's been with me through everything. When I was feeling lost, he was always there. I don't want to let him go." Henry felt a soft tug at his heart as he looked at Buddy, who was now nuzzling Ethan's hand with his nose, as if to say, "I'm here." He could see the bond between them, the way Buddy had brought Ethan out of his shell, the way the little dog's gentle nature had helped heal the wounds of the past. "Buddy is special," Henry said softly, watching the puppy with a tender smile. "He's been there for both of us, in ways I can't even explain. I think you're right, Ethan. We should keep him." Ethan's eyes lit up, a wide smile spreading across his face. "Really? You mean it?" Henry chuckled and patted Ethan's shoulder. "Of course. He's part of the family now. I think he's meant to stay with us." From that moment, Buddy became a permanent part of the farm. He followed Ethan everywhere, from the barn to the fields and even into the house at night, curling up at the foot of Henry's bed. Buddy's presence brought a new sense of joy and stability to their lives. His playful antics lifted the spirits of everyone in the household, and his calm, loving nature reminded Henry and Ethan that sometimes the best kind of healing comes from the simplest of things, like the love of a dog. In the days that followed, Ethan began to grow even more confident, no longer burdened by the weight of the past. He found a sense of peace in his relationship with Buddy, and that peace spread through every part of his life. He continued to care for the puppies, but Buddy became his most trusted companion, his constant shadow as he worked on the farm, played, or simply sat in the barn, lost in thought. Henry watched all of this with a quiet pride. He had seen Ethan grow from a boy who had been consumed by grief and uncertainty into a young man who had found his place in the world, and he had seen how Buddy had played a crucial role in that transformation. It was almost as if the little dog had been sent to them for this very purpose, to help Ethan heal and to bring the family closer together. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Henry turned to Ethan and said, "You've done a good job, Ethan. You've really come into your own. I'm proud of the man you're becoming." Ethan smiled, his eyes reflecting the warmth of the setting sun. "I think a lot of it has to do with Buddy," he said, his voice filled with affection. "He's been with me through everything. He's more than just a dog." Henry nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "He's more than just a dog," he agreed. "He's a part of this family. And so are you." As the evening grew darker, the stars began to twinkle above the farm. Buddy lay peacefully at Ethan's feet, his tail thumping gently against the ground. The air was calm, the world felt still, and for the first time in a long while, Henry felt that everything was right. His family was healing, and the farm, which had once felt like a place of solitude and loss, had become a place of hope and new beginnings. The winter had given way to early spring, and the once chilly air now carried a hint of warmth, a promise of new beginnings. Henry, standing on the porch of his farmhouse, watched as Ethan and Buddy played in the yard, their laughter and the sound of the puppies' playful barks filling the air. The farm, which had once been a place of solitude, now felt alive with the energy of healing, family, and the promise of better days ahead. The road to this moment had been anything but easy. There had been disagreements, tensions, and deep heartaches that had threatened to tear the family apart. But through it all, Goldie, Buddy, and the puppies had been the silent but powerful forces of change. They had brought Ethan out of his shell, they had mended old wounds, and, most importantly, they had created a space where Henry, Ethan, and even Andrew could find peace and understanding. It had been weeks since that intense family counseling session where Andrew had reluctantly agreed to allow Ethan to stay on the farm. Despite his reservations, Andrew had begun to see the transformation in his son. He had seen how Ethan had become more confident, more alive, and how he had found a sense of purpose and stability in the love and care of the puppies. Andrew had made good on his promise to visit more often. At first, his visits had been short, awkward, and strained, but over time he had started to open up more. The more he saw how Ethan was thriving on the farm, the more he understood that maybe this was the best place for him, for now. One evening, just after supper, Andrew knocked on the door. Henry answered it, his face lighting up in surprise as he saw his son standing there, holding a bag of groceries. "Hey, Dad," Andrew said, a soft smile on his face. "I thought I'd come by and spend some time with Ethan. Maybe help out with the puppies." Henry smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "That sounds great, Andrew. Ethan's in the barn playing with Buddy." The two men exchanged a quiet look, a silent understanding passing between them. They had come a long way since their heated arguments. Andrew had realized that the best way he could be a part of his son's life was to support him, not force him into a different life. As Andrew walked into the barn, Ethan looked up, surprised and a little uncertain, but as his father walked over to him, the tension in his shoulders melted away. "Hey, Dad," Ethan said cautiously, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Hey, son," Andrew replied, sitting down next to him. He smiled as Buddy bounded over, tail wagging, ready to play. Ethan's face softened as he watched his father pet the puppy, and it was clear that this small, simple moment was a turning point. After a few minutes of silence, Andrew spoke again, his voice quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I want to apologize to you, Ethan. I know I wasn't there for you when you needed me the most. But I see now how much this farm means to you, how much Grandpa means to you. And I want to be part of your life, but not in a way that takes you away from what's helping you heal." Ethan looked at him, his eyes full of emotion. "It's been hard, Dad, but being here, it's made a difference. It's made me feel like I can breathe again." Andrew nodded, his own eyes filled with understanding. "I know, and I've seen the change in you. It's good to see you happy again, Ethan. I want to be a part of that. I just didn't know how before." Henry, watching the two of them from a distance, felt his heart swell with pride. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like his family was on the right path. The tension that had once hung thick in the air was now replaced with something else, something more hopeful. As the evening wore on, Andrew stayed for dinner. They ate together in the warm glow of the farmhouse, the sound of laughter and easy conversation filling the room. Ethan, sitting next to his father, didn't feel the old strain anymore. There was no tension, no fear of losing something important. For the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of something, a family that was willing to rebuild, to heal, and to move forward together. After dinner, they went outside to the porch, where Goldie, Buddy, and the puppies were playing under the twilight sky. The stars had begun to appear, dotting the sky with their soft light. Ethan sat down on the porch swing, Buddy jumping up beside him. Andrew stood next to his father, watching the scene before him, taking it all in. "I think this is where we belong," Andrew said softly, his voice full of reflection. "This farm, this family, it's not perfect, but it's ours." Henry smiled, his heart full. "I think you're right, Andrew. It's ours." As the evening grew darker, Ethan leaned back, watching the stars twinkle overhead. He felt something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, belonging, hope. The farm, once a place of sorrow and isolation, had become a sanctuary. The love of a dog, the care of a grandfather, and the strength of family had brought them all back together, and now, with Buddy by his side, Ethan felt ready to face whatever the future held.